That's not necessarily that these things are bad, but they do show us something about where we're going as a nation and about our pursuit of comfort. You know, people don't like to go to the dentist. Why? Because it's uncomfortable. People hesitate to get involved in situations they see around them that are bad because, well, they're afraid of what the consequences are for them. We even fight wars to protect our comfort and our way of life. I'm going to share with you today a parable. Pastor Mark is preaching a series on parables here. And I'm going to share with you one of my favorite parables from Matthew chapter 25. Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. Then he left on his trip. The servant who received 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, the master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, "Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more." The master was full of praise. "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." The servant who had received 2 bags of silver came forward and said, "Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more." The master said, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." Then the servant with the 1 bag of silver came and said, "Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you did not cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back." But the master replied, "You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest in it." Then he ordered, "Take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into the outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." It's quite a story. Now I'm a very interactive preacher, so I'm going to ask you some questions today, and I'm going to expect you to answer them, okay? So as I ask you questions, if you know the answer, just feel free to shout it out, okay? How does this story tell us that the funds were distributed? According to the ability of the people they were given to. So it appears that the master was interested in the success of these servants. He didn't give them more than they were capable of handling. He tried to give them what he thought they could handle well. He hoped that each one would succeed. And so when this master returns, he calls in the servants to give an account of how they used their money. Now think with me for a moment about the first two servants. What did these first two servants have in common? They both invested what they were given. Both servants invested what they were given. Now, the first two servants invested what they were given. What was their return rate? Somebody can tell me this. 100%. Look at that. Now, do we have any business people in the audience? Yeah? Yeah, we've got a few. Okay, we've got some business people in the audience. So tell me, if you invest money and you get 100% return, what kind of a return rate is that? Is that a great return rate? Yeah. So what kind of investment did you likely make? Yeah, a risky one. If you didn't put your bank in this, or your money in a savings account, if you got 100% back. You didn't put it in a certificate of deposit if you got 100% back. You made some kind of a risky investment. And these first two servants made risky investments. And it was important to the master, apparently, that these servants made these risky investments. He was just as pleased with the second servant as he was with the first. And he responded exactly the same to the second servant as he did to the first. Because I think both of them were doing what he wanted them to do. Both were acting within their abilities. And the risk was in essence the same for both of them. The master was pleased that both servants had risked everything. Think about that for a minute. That's what pleased the master. The master was pleased that both servants had risked everything. Now, I want to make another observation about this. These servants didn't have the internet, okay? So if they were going to go and invest what it is they were given, they were going to have to go out and find people to invest it with. They were going to have to build relationships. They were going to have to figure out who they could trust. There was no way that they could share what they had, that they could invest what they had been given without interacting with other people. And probably along the way, as they built relationships and invested what they were given, they probably impacted the lives of these people that they invested with. Now we have the third servant. The third servant took what he was given and buried it in the ground. And there are three observations I want to make about this third servant. First of all, this servant certainly didn't trust the master. As a matter of fact, the story tells us that the servant was afraid of the master, didn't have much of a relationship with the master. Secondly, the servant was kind of a loner. Burying his money in the ground didn't require that he built any relationships with anybody. And thirdly, this servant did what was most comfortable for him. Didn't seem really concerned about what the master wanted, but seemed concerned about serving his own comfort. He also made sure he didn't make any mistakes along the way. You know what scares me? scares me is that when I look in the mirror, I'm afraid that often I look more like the third servant than the first two. The thing that we said was the primary thing that set the first two servants apart from the third